How's it going, fellas? My name's Andy, and today we're gonna take a look at a topic that's been pretty relevant as of late: super teams. Now, everyone's definition of a super team is different. For example, some fans believe that the Celtics in the 1960s were a super team, or the Big Three Celtics were a super team, or LeBron going to the Heat was a super team, and of course the Golden State Warriors after Durant joined them. And, well, even before Durant joined them, you can still call them a super team as well, because they still had 3 All-Stars. But here's my definition of a super team and how it's created. It's a simple concept, but it's hard to find many times it's happened over the course of NBA history. So first off, a superstar player in his prime joins one of the best teams in the league, whether it's by signing as a free agent or through a one-sided trade. This is my definition of how a super team can be formed. We can sit here and talk all day about how the Boston Celtics in the 60s were the first super team or whatever, but most of the guys there were drafted and developed by the team themselves. Even though they had a ton of All-Stars and Hall of Famers and by all means can be considered as a super team, that's not my definition of a super team, so they don't count in my book. And also, if they did count, then this video would be like 1 minute long, and yeah, that would be it. Alright, so what was the earliest occurrence of a superstar in his prime joining one of the best teams in the league? A recent example would obviously be Durant joining the Warriors, but what was the first time something like this happened in NBA history? Well, first off, let's take a look at Wilt Chamberlain. In the 1968 offseason, Wilt was traded to the Lakers after just winning the MVP in the previous season. This was the first time in NBA history that the reigning MVP was traded in the summer right after the season ended. So, I mean, it looks pretty clear that under my criteria that this would qualify as the first ever super team created. Wilt joined a Lakers team that made the NBA Finals in the previous season, led by Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, who both averaged over 26 points a game. But the thing is, Wilt was not in his prime at this time. He was 32 years old in his first season with the Lakers, and although he was still very good, putting up over 20 points and 20 rebounds a game, that's actually really far off from what he was doing in his prime. When he was with the Sixers or the Warriors, he was averaging like 30, 40, 50 points a game over a season, and with over 25 rebounds as well. In my opinion, those seasons were when he was in his prime. On the Lakers, he was still playing well, playing great defense, but he was still the third option on the team behind West and Baylor. So in this scenario, Wilt technically was not in his prime, so we're just gonna say that he doesn't qualify as the guy who formed the first ever super team. Next up, Oscar Robertson. In 1970, he joined the Milwaukee Bucks and teamed up with a young Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or Lou Alcindor, which was his name back then. The Bucks were one of the best teams in the league and won 56 games in the previous season, and Kareem was an MVP candidate. However, when Oscar joined the Bucks, he was already 32 years old and already on the decline. He was no longer in his prime either, so this situation does not count either. Oh, and speaking of Kareem, in 1975, at 28 years old in the middle of his prime, he joined the Lakers. He was at the peak of his career and a perennial MVP candidate. And he was also the best player in the league at the time too. But the problem with this scenario is that the Lakers team that he joined in 1975 was not a super team. I mean, they won 30 games in the previous season and did not even make the playoffs. In fact, even after Kareem joined them, they still missed the playoffs in his first season as a Laker. So yeah, you can't be a super team if you don't make the playoffs. Now let's move on to the 1982 offseason, which I believe is the first time a super team has ever been created. So in the 1981-82 season, the Philadelphia 76ers were led by Dr. J and Andrew Toney. They won 58 games in the regular season this year, but unfortunately they lost in the finals to the Lakers. So in the 1982 offseason, the Sixers acquired Moses Malone from the Houston Rockets. Moses Malone was 27 years old and just had a season where he averaged 31 points and 15 rebounds a game on the Rockets. Oh, and he also won the MVP as well. That season was the best statistical season of his entire career, and to top it off, he also led the Rockets to the 1981 NBA Finals in the year before that. Around this time in the early 80s, Moses Malone was arguably the third or fourth best player in the league, behind only Magic, Bird, and maybe Kareem, although he was getting a bit old by now. So for the 1982-83 season, Moses, who was arguably a top 3 player, joined a Sixers team that just made the finals. That's pretty ridiculous when you think about it, but back then, super teams were not really a thing. Nobody called them super teams. However, looking back, this situation with Moses does sound very familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, Kevin Durant, who was also a top 3 player in the league when he was with OKC, he was 27 years old as well, and he joined a team that just lost in the finals, Golden State. I guess the only difference is that Moses did not join a team that just beat him in the playoffs like what Durant did. And obviously, the 2015-16 Warriors, who won 73 games, they were a better team than the 1981-82 Sixers that Moses joined. But if you look at everything else and compare the two players, their situation was very similar. Alright, so anyway, the Sixers have Moses, and what happens now? Well, I'll tell ya. Moses leads the Sixers to a 65-17 record and dominate every team in their way in the playoffs. In the 1983 playoffs, the Sixers only lost one game. Just one game. They returned to the finals again and faced the Lakers again, but this time, they swept them 4-0. Moses and Dr. J win their first and only NBA championship. The series wasn't even close. The Sixers just destroyed them. In that year, Moses won the regular season MVP and the finals MVP in his first season with the Sixers. He averaged 26 points and 18 rebounds a game in the finals, and he also held Kareem to only 7.5 rebounds a game. That's really impressive, and to be honest, this whole thing also shows how underrated Moses really was. He was a ridiculously good player, and in my opinion, he's a top 6 or top 7 center of all time. Anyway, in the next few years, Moses, Dr. J, Andrew Toney, and a young Charles Barkley and the rest of the Sixers would get eliminated in the conference finals, semifinals, and the first round a couple of times. So they didn't really form a legitimate dynasty. And by 1986, Moses would be traded to the Washington Bullets. However, I believe that this is the first time a superstar in his prime willingly joined one of the best teams in the league. The Sixers were amazing before Moses arrived, so him joining them in the 1982 offseason was just unfair. And it definitely showed when they destroyed everyone in the playoffs. This also seems very similar to the Warriors' first season with Durant, where they just obliterated everyone in the playoffs and lost only one game as well. And that was all the way in the finals. But of course, there is a major difference though. While the Sixers back then fell off kinda quickly, the Warriors right now look like a legitimate dynasty. There are some other good, great teams in the league, but I think most people would agree that all of them are a step below the Warriors, especially when the playoffs begin. They just have too much talent and they're way too deep. But anyway, that's all folks. In my opinion, the first time a super team was willingly created was by Moses Malone. What do you guys think about super teams? How would you define them in your own words? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.